So after years of pushing towards this goal, it looks like we're finally going to get a national inquiry. Now, I've taken a couple of days to consolidate all of my thoughts about this, and I'm going to share them in this video. I've got no doubt that this isn't the video that's going to tell you for the first time, oh my God, we're getting a national inquiry. But what I will do is this. Firstly, I'll tell you why Keir Starmer has been forced into this position. This is not something that he wants to do because, quite frankly, it could tear open and destroy the Labour Party. Secondly, I'm going to take a look at what we need to do to ensure that this national inquiry is honest, that it has integrity, that it delivers the right results for the victims and also for the rest of the British public who've been gaslit for decades now. And lastly, I'm going to take a look at some of the left-wing activists and gaslighters who are suddenly changing their tune and saying, yeah, this is a great thing. This is what I've wanted all along. Yeah, no, it isn't. Not at all. You know now that the truth is going to come out and that you are going to look absolutely horrific. So suddenly you've changed your tune. Completely unacceptable. So how exactly have we arrived at the point where Keir Starmer has announced the very thing that he objected to just a few months ago? Well, I'll tell you. If you remember, back in December, Elon Musk went on a Twitter tirade talking about some of the things that were going on here in Britain and how disgusting and shameful they were. Now, even back then, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party outright refused to do a national inquiry. But they had to do something because it gained too much attention around the world. So they called in Baroness Casey. Now, Baroness Casey is a veteran of national inquiries, and they called her in to do something called a rapid audit, basically to determine whether or not we actually did need a national inquiry. Now, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, they thought she was a safe pair of hands because at the time she was saying, no, we don't need a national inquiry. So Keir Starmer thought, I'll give this to Baroness Casey and she will inevitably do her rapid audit. It will take a few months and she'll determine we don't need a national inquiry. We already know everything that's gone on, nothing more to see here. And then we can push it aside and move on from it. But that's not what Baroness Casey did. She changed her mind.
Prime Minister said, Baroness Casey, that you didn't think a new national inquiry was needed when you began your work. Is that right? And what made you change your mind?
Yes, that's absolutely right, actually. I think I've surprised people, actually, in Downing Street and beyond in some ways, that, you know, the reluctance of local areas to face up to the facts that they didn't treat victims well enough, that they haven't accepted that they have failings. And so from things like the announcement of the 5 local reviews, only Oldham Council came forward and said, yes, we better get on and do one. Nobody else did.
And that was pretty much it. Once Labour's safe pair of hands in Baroness Casey had decided, no, we do need a national inquiry, Keir Starmer no longer had any room to manoeuvre. The person that he had called in to determine whether one was required or not was saying yes. And pretty much everyone else outside of the Labour Party was also saying yes. So where does he go at that point? Well, his hand is forced. He has to announce one, and so he did. It's not something that Keir Starmer wanted to do because the Labour Party are up to their necks in it. Now, why did Baroness Casey change her mind? Well, you can go and read her 200-page audit, and I'll confess I haven't read the full thing. I've deferred that responsibility to others who've picked out certain parts. But one of the most interesting parts is that she discovered the police were deliberately not recording the ethnicity of certain offenders for certain types of crimes, specifically grooming-related crimes. And that already set her alarm bells ringing. Why were the police, in 66% of instances, not recording the ethnicity of offenders? The only logical explanation is that they're trying to cover something up in order to smooth over community relations. In every other crime, they are reporting this data, but not this specific one, because they know how sensitive this topic is. Not good. So there's your first piece of evidence for a cover-up. Unfortunately, it gets worse than this, because a few years ago, the Home Office used this misleading data, despite the fact that the ethnicity of offenders had routinely not been recorded for some strange reason. They used this data to put out a Home Office report. And the purpose of the report was to say that there is no ethnic pattern to the offenders whatsoever. Nothing to see here. Pakistani men, for example, are not overrepresented in these crimes at all. But what they didn't do is question or query why the police were not recording the ethnicity of offenders. And that is extremely misleading. It's basically propaganda from the Home Office pushed out to gaslight the British public. Completely unacceptable, and Baroness Casey quite rightly called them out for it. Again, it looks like another part of a cover-up, and that's why she's calling for a national inquiry. In fact, in some of Baroness Casey's previous work, she noted that the word Pakistani in the reports had been deliberately tip-hexed out. How crazy is that? How can you expect the British people to trust you when you're doing things like that to mislead them and gaslight them? Of course they can't.
Do you think that there has been a tendency for people who've been worried about the story to have been labelled as racist?
Yes, I mean, I found it in Rotherham. It was one of those moments in life where I was following through on a children's file, an archive, child in, and found the word Pakistani Tipexed out.
Now here's where it gets interesting and worrying in equal measure, because if you take a look at the scope of the National Inquiry, as we understand it so far, they're going to focus on local inquiries. Now, I do believe fully that local inquiries need to happen, particularly in some of the areas that have been abjectly refusing them, like, say, Bradford, for example, which is very suspicious. They have campaigned tirelessly not to have a local inquiry into Bradford, one of the areas with the most Pakistani representation in the country. That's extremely suspicious. If they have nothing to hide, they should say, sure, let's do a local inquiry. You'll find that nothing strange has been going on here whatsoever. But that's not the approach that they've taken. Anyway, if you look into it, it looks like they're not going to focus on the Home Office, Whitehall, the Department for Education, but they really need to. I've just shown you one example where the Home Office put out a very misleading report to the public of why people in the Home Office themselves do need to be investigated, why senior civil servants must be held accountable. And Dominic Cummings, some people like Dominic Cummings, some don't, but he gives a really fantastic insight, fantastic but also disturbing, insight into exactly the kinds of things that were going on in the Home Office between Whitehall and local councils over this issue. Take a listen.
I would watch the redacted documents and the actual unredacted documents about lots of these cases, and you could see that the redacted documents are redacted entirely to hide the incompetence of the system. Now, what happened on the gangs is that when Andrew Norfolk at the time started to try to report the issue, the council went to officials inside the Department for Education and said, we want to bring a judicial review to have the courts suppress the Times' reporting and not allow it to happen. Some of the officials inside the DfE, who routinely organised cover-ups on such issues, were of course very in favour of it. But there were another set of officials inside DfE who agreed with me that this was absolutely appalling, and in fact we should do the opposite. So what we ended up doing was saying to Michael Gove, you should write to the council and say that if you bring this judicial review, we will actually appear in court on behalf of the Times, not on behalf of you. That obviously blew up the judicial review attempt by the council to keep it secret, and then Norfolk could publish his piece in the Times. Unfortunately, I think Norfolk died recently without even knowing that this ever even happened. But that's just one small example of something which happened many, many times on this subject over a few decades in Whitehall, which is, of course, why the system is absolutely desperate not to have an inquiry. A system which has inquiries at the drop of a hat about all kinds of, like, one person dies, public inquiry, spend 80 million quid on lawyers, take 5 years. This case involving thousands and thousands and thousands of children, no.
It just, to me, it seems bizarre there's no accountability.
Now, as I said, some people like Dominic Cummings, some don't. But on this, I absolutely believe him. And why do I believe him? Because it's Occam's razor, right? The simplest explanation is usually the right one. And the simplest explanation for all of the things that have been taking place over the last 2 decades is that people within the civil service, within the Home Office, within the Department for Education, within local councils have been deliberately trying to cover this up and, I'll say it again, gaslight the British people into not looking or talking about this issue. So yes, I believe him. Now, I will say this overall, of course, it's a victory. But there are certain things that we need to do. It's our responsibility to ensure that when the scope of this national inquiry is announced, we're on the ball and we take a close look at it. Rupert Lowe, for example, has put out 10 tests for exactly what the national inquiry needs to do. And I'm going to read you a few of them. I'm going to read you the 5 that I think are the most important, but I'll put a link to the tweet in the description of this video so you can read all the detail for yourself. Now, the first one is, will it confront the role of ethnicity, culture and religion without any censorship? Yes, that's absolutely crucial because that is the thing that most people believe is the cause of covering these crimes up in the first place, the ethnicity of the offenders. So that absolutely has to happen. Will it publish the demographic and historic data on both perpetrators and victims? Again, we already have a pretty good idea of what this is going to look like. It's not going to be pretty reading for certain communities, but it has to happen. The British people need to accept this, take a look at it, and then they can figure out what they want to do next as the voting public. Will it review every relevant child protection file in local authorities? Of course, that has to happen. And will it do the same for every relevant police force? Yeah, because we've seen clearly that the police have a vested interest for community relations, for making their own lives easier, of covering these crimes up. That's despicable, and the people who were involved in that need to be held to account. Many police officers, I stress, will be completely innocent. They won't have done any of this. Many of them will just be good people, right? They either weren't aware of any of this, fine, or they were trying to whistleblow, or they were trying to do the right thing. I'd like to think that's the majority of the police. Who knows? I'll let the National Inquiry sort that out. And lastly, will it investigate the political motivations behind the cover-ups, including the role of the Labour Party? Now that one is especially crucial. It's interesting that this inquiry is being called under a Labour government. I have no idea why the Tories didn't do this for 14 years, because frankly, it would have been so easy for them to do it and completely discredit their own political opponent. But the Tories are strange. They make absolutely no sense. They're not conservative. They're a weird bunch. But Labour, as I mentioned, are up to their necks in it. We know that in the towns and the areas that were worst hit by these scandals, so far that we know of, a national inquiry may find out more information, but so far, as we understand it, almost all of those areas are Labour-held areas. And naturally, that's led to people saying, hey, this has been covered up so that you can protect your votes. Local councils and councillors have been deliberately obfuscating the investigations and making sure that this isn't made clear to people so that they can keep winning elections. That's inevitably what people are going to think. Now, if that's not true, come out and prove it. We'll see. Now that a national inquiry has been announced, there's something else interesting going on. You see, a lot of those people who were responsible for gaslighting the British public, well, they've started to change their tunes a little bit. Take Nick Lowles, for example, of Hope Not Hate. He is a man who has built an entire career out of basically defaming everyone who is concerned about this. Anyone who's concerned about this issue is actually a far-right racist, bigot, conspiracy theorist, and there's nothing to see here. And yet just a couple of days ago, he was tweeting about how he supports a national inquiry, and this should have happened years ago. Why the change of tune, Nick? Is it possibly because the game is up? Because once the findings of the national inquiry are released to the British public, they will see that everything the far-right bigots have been saying is actually true, and therefore your attempt to suppress them was actually running cover for some of the most depraved people in the country. I don't know. I'm not Nick Lowles. I'm not a spokesperson for Nick Lowles, thankfully, so I don't have to answer that question. I'm sure he's got his own explanation. Someone can go and pose that question to him. It's not just Nick Lowles, though. Owen Jones. Owen Jones is also starting to backtrack on things that he said in the past, but unfortunately, we've got the receipts.
Nowhere did I deny that British men of Pakistani origin had many white girls in, for example, Rotherham and Telford. These are horrific scandals, which are very much real, and it is not racist or untrue to talk about those scandals.
About vulnerable white girls being targeted by British Pakistani grooming gangs. Now, that is the sort of thing you would have expected to read in BNP leaflets, and which not that long ago would actually have been condemned by Tory and Labour politicians alike. But we are in 2023 in the worst possible timeline. It's not true. It's really important to make this very, very clear. It isn't true.
So what exactly is my takeaway message from this video? Well, it's this. We should be very grateful to those people who have pushed this issue right to the forefront of the agenda and to actually make sure that we get a national inquiry. And I'm talking about people like Andrew Norfolk, who unfortunately has passed away before this announcement was made, but also Maggie Oliver, Tommy Robinson, Raja Mir. Yes, I'm even going to include Elon Musk in there because actually, as much as you might not like it, and he is a late comer to this, I think without him going on that Twitter tirade back in December, none of this would be happening. So yes, Elon Musk gets absolute credit, even though he's not British, he's not English. You know, without him, we wouldn't be where we are today, right? It's as simple as that. And we also need to remember the people who deliberately tried to cover this up. Not only do we need to remember them, okay, we also need to make sure that they are held accountable for what they have done. Now, if someone just casually was repeating a post that the Home Office made and they didn't know any better, look, they're not really guilty of anything, okay? You just have to keep that in mind. But for the people, say, in the Home Office who knew what they were doing, they need to be held to account. They should be sacked. Possibly they should be prosecuted. People in the police who knew what was going on, they should be prosecuted. MPs, councillors, they should be prosecuted. People working in child services who knew what was going on, they should be prosecuted. And where possible, in all of these cases, deported. As simple as that. We don't need those kinds of people who are willing to cover up the most heinous crimes against British people staying in our country. Anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say. I'm going to try and avoid going on a ramble. I know I'm late to this news cycle. I hope you found some value in this video. Please do leave a like, comment, subscribe if you're not already, and I will see you in a future video. I'm in France, by the way. This is a French woodblock, although, you know, it's not really that special. It just looks like every other woodblock that you could find. But yeah, I'm making my way slowly towards home. I say slowly, I've been driving about 400 miles per day, so not really that slowly. I miss the dog. I want to get back to her. Like, comment, subscribe. See you in a future video. Bye.